Hello, I'm Tracy Otsuka. Welcome to another episode of ADHD for Smartass Women. Today, we are going to talk about a subject that one of my favorite people on this planet, the preeminent expert on ADHD, Dr. Ned Hallowell, taught me about 3 years ago that was so profound to me in understanding my brain and how it works, or I should say, how to work with it as well, that I have doubled and tripled down on this concept ever since. So you are going to discover that this is probably the shortest podcast episode that I've ever recorded. And I'm doing that for a reason. Because I think this content is so important, I don't want to muddy it up with a bunch of other things. I want you to really be able to grasp what it is that I'm saying. And so I've tried to simplify it as much as possible. And again, I'm not including anything else with it. Okay? So let's go. If you struggle with rumination, rejection sensitive dysphoria or RSD, perseveration, not feeling good enough, feeling too much, you're struggling to find your positive emotion, you need to put everything down and really tune in right now, okay? Look, in order to make real concrete changes in our lives, first we need awareness and understanding around why we do what we do. Once we understand that, only then can we put systems in place to actually do something different. And there is some fairly new research around how it is that we can get stuck in that loop of negative thoughts, something our brains can be expert at. That's rumination, right? Our ADHD causes us to hyperfocus because what we know is we can hyperfocus on things that really serve us, that are really good, or we can hyperfocus on things that aren't so good, right? That are really, frankly, bad for our brains. And we can worry so much that we wear a rut or a groove in our thinking. Up until recently, when we got stuck in that negative emotion, brooding, ruminating thoughts, the best anyone could offer was, suck it up. Pray on it till it goes away. Be positive. It was not very useful nor helpful advice. Today, we are finally starting to understand the genetics around how our brains actually work. We also know that environmental factors can cause epigenetic modification. So, for example, you may have been born with genes that predispose you to depression, but because you grew up in a loving family and with teachers that were nurturing and cared about you personally, those genes were never expressed. So you go through life and you never experience depression. On the other hand, you cannot have been so lucky, right? And you may have been dealt the short straw, lost the parent lottery, and worse, were subjected to trauma and abuse. And so those same inherited genes for depression, unfortunately, they actually did get expressed. Bottom line, when we're talking about nature versus nurture, it always comes down to both. Good nurture helps to reduce the influence of bad nature and vice versa. However, even if you weren't lucky enough, what we now know is that because of neuroplasticity, we can actually change our brain for the better. We used to think that once you reach a certain age, the brain is fully developed, it's static, and what you have is what you will always have. We now know that this is not true. You can change your brain at any age. It is never too late to build a different life, a different relationship, a different brain. As I've mentioned many times, the inherent strengths and weaknesses of our brain, well, they're two sides of the same coin, right? So on one hand, we are highly imaginative, unbelievably creative, entrepreneurial, energetic, and dynamic. But that is what also leads or can lead us to be brooders, worriers, and ruminators. So I want to teach you today a really simple concept that's filled with hope and positive emotion. Okay. So let's back up. Here's where we're going to start. We have these two networks in our brain. And just like our ADHD brains, and frankly, any brain, it's never all good or all bad, right? So the first network is called the TPN, or the Task Positive Network. The TPN is related to external tasks. It lights up when your brain is in action. It's the brain's focus mode. When it's activated, you're in the zone, you're fully immersed in what you're doing. Let's say you're in a coffee shop and your laptop is open and you're going to town, right? You are typing away, ideas flowing. You're oblivious to the chatter both in your head and all around you. The clinking of the cups, the sound of the espresso grinder going. You're not hearing any of it. You are on. It's like there's a spotlight that illuminates only what you're working on, making everything else fade into the background. And when I say lights up, you can actually see this happening in functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs. When you're in the TPN, you're not aware of whether you're happy or you're not happy because you're not even thinking about it. You are literally in the present. And incidentally, the reason why so many people are starting to look so distracted, ADHD or not, is because as a society, we're spending less and less time in the task positive network focusing on a single task. The TPN, it's like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. And we've been losing it, right? The TPN weakens and we lose our ability to focus, our attention span shortens, and that's exactly what we're seeing. So let's go back to the TPN. Once we finish the task or we get distracted from the task, the TPN then no longer lights up. And instead, another part of the brain, the default mode network or DMN, lights up. And the DMN, on the other hand, is like your brain's wandering mode. It's related to your internal thought processes, and it kicks in when you drift away from your project, when you get lost in a daydream. You're thinking about something that you did yesterday that you wish you hadn't, right? That's when the DMN kicks in, okay? The DMN, however, is also not all bad nor all good. It is the seat of your imagination. It's where your ideas, your creativity, and your problem-solving abilities come from. It's where you make all of those connections, but also where darkness and brooding and rumination comes from. It's the network involved in thinking about yourself, others, and your past and your future, okay? Task positive network is all about the present. The default mode network, you're in the past or you're in the future. So for people with ADHD, the switch between the TPN, when you're in action, and the default mode network can be a bit glitchy. You might find that even though you're sitting in this coffee shop with the intention to work, your brain decides, you know what, this is a great time to engage the DMN. And what happens is you go down this mental adventure instead of letting yourself focus on the task at hand. Or you might hyperfocus with your TPN so locked into your work that hours fly by and you barely notice the world around you. In the neurotypical brain, you can click back and forth between the TPN and the DMN pretty easily. And when the TPN is lit up, the DMN is not. fMRIs show that for the ADHD brain, even when we're in the TPN, the DMN can turn on as well, trying to distract us, right? So that toggle switch between the DMN and the TPN, it's glitchy. And so we can all of a sudden get stuck in the DMN. This is a malfunction in the imagination. And it's why we often see a link between extreme creativity and depression. When we get stuck in the default mode network, the DMN, it's a problem, particularly when it comes to rumination and rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD, which many women with ADHD struggle with. So when the DMN is active, it's like your brain is on autopilot, right? It is wandering through all kinds of past conversations, future worries, hypothetical scenarios, and it usually doesn't have a clear destination or goal. It's just pinging around there. And this meandering, of course, can lead to rumination, where we get stuck in this loop of overthinking or dwelling on negative thoughts, especially after perceived rejection or criticism. Remember, we can hyperfocus on the good, or we can hyperfocus on the bad. So have you ever been so deep in creating, you're having this great time, you're loving what you're doing, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this voice speaks up. And like, where is that coming from? And it's inside you, right? It's in your mind. And it starts to challenge you. You know what? This sucks. You're not very good. So-and-so could do this so much better than you. Yep. That was you in your task positive network, minding your own business, getting into action, and all of a sudden you slip into your default mode network. The key takeaway here is that both networks are valuable. Both of them play significant roles in how we think, how we learn, and how we create. For someone with ADHD, understanding and harnessing the power of both the TPN and the DMN, learning when and how to let your mind wander for creativity's sake, and when to buckle down and focus can be a powerful strategy for working with your brain instead of against it. So you're in that coffee shop and you really want to get something done, but all of a sudden you find yourself in your DMN. What do? You get out of your head and you get into your body and you get into action. You jump the tracks from the DMN back into the TPN. How do you do this? You distract yourself with action. You go for a walk. You can call a friend. You can pet your dog. You can get into action around why you went to that coffee shop in the first place, right? Did you need to write that book? Do you need to complete that assignment? Did you need to check off that to-do on your to-do list? Well, do it. That's how you get back into your task positive network. And we are happiest in action. Again, the TPN, remember I said it's like a muscle. If you don't use it, you will lose it. And this is why this concept was so huge for me. You know, I'm always talking about the fact that we can spike our own dopamine by getting into action, doing that thing that we really want to do, often doing that thing that we're a little bit fearful about, but we really want to do it for ourselves. So there's a lot of intention behind it. Over time, I have learned that I can control my mood by jumping into action. So I knew this worked. I just didn't know why it worked. Again, when you are in the TPN in action, you're focused on external tasks, so you are in the present moment. When you're in the DMN, you're right smack dab in the middle of your internal thought processes, which means you're either in the past or the future, right? When you reactivate the TPN, you shut down the DMN, but the DMN is sneaky and it's going to try to wiggle its way back in. But if you jump back into focused action by engaging the imagination, you can shut it down. Isn't that huge? The point here is you need to focus on anything but yourself. Get out of your head, out of your mind. Our ADHD brains are happiest when we're in action and we're creating. If you're struggling right now, I want you to think about when was the last time that you were really happy, that you felt a lot of positive emotion, right? What was your creative outlet then? What were you building that held special meaning for you? And then I want you to ask yourself, okay, well, what am I creating right now that holds special meaning for me? And if your answer is nothing, well, no wonder that you're struggling. And remember, creativity is not just painting or music or dance or sculpting. It's also how we build businesses and widgets and put novel concepts together and create what's never been created before. Now, remember when I said that there's good and bad parts to both TPN and the DMN? Well, you know those people who are mechanical in the way they follow all the rules? They're punctual to a fault, right? The bureaucrats. They are always doing the perfectly correct thing at the exact right time. Yeah, well, when you're stuck in the TPN and are completely devoid of imagination whatsoever, guess what? You're in the TPN. And you wouldn't want to be them either, right? You wouldn't want to be in the TPN all the time. In truth, you couldn't be them. They're so boring, right? So I love this TPN DMN concept so much because it really explains my life. I coined a phrase when I was in college called post-final depression. I would get so excited about what I was going to do with all my friends once my finals were done. And I would plan with them what we were going to do. And the finals would be over. My friends would be all excited. And I would be like, is this all there is? and I'd be looking around for like, next, what was the next big thing that I could do? Clearly, I was in the TPN. And then once I stopped working, I slipped into the DMN. And I didn't want to be there because I knew that I always felt better when I was creating and in action around the TPN. This concept also explains why so many of us with ADHD have done so many things. We know how to do so many things, right? Many of us think we've done nothing because there may have been no real intention behind what we were doing. So we've done all these things, but they're not connected. So they often don't allow us to progress in our learning, our income, the knowledge we have in a specific area, so we can move up and through the ranks. And that is exactly why setting up that foundational piece is so important. Creating intention around that sweet spot where our values, our strengths, our talents, skills, passion, purpose all convene, the sweet spot, because we have these brains of interest, but we're interested in so much. And if we chase every little thing that we're sort of interested in, because we've discovered that we feel so much better when we're in action in the TPN, we end up often with this disjointed list of a million things that we've done that don't really serve us, that don't really serve our intention, right? Who we are, who we want to be, what we want to do. And so we're not really moving in the direction that we want to go. Again, why? Because there is no intention behind it. We're just doing these things because they temporarily make us feel better, but they don't connect to what we really want to do. So setting up that foundational piece, answering that what do I do with my life question is exactly what I do with my patented program, Your ADHD Brain is A-OK. And you can find out more about it at ADHDforsmartwomen.com/AOK. As I mentioned, everything I talk about is always in the show notes. So you can find it all at ADHDforsmartwomen.com/podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening to the ADHD for Smartass Women podcast. And I will see you here, same time, same place, next week. Until then, be brilliant.